Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this chapel. Church will begin now. This medieval chapel. I'm Gaby Dunn. I'll introduce myself a little in case you were just here you thought I was Susie Orman or something. I've been bad with money my whole life. In 2016-ish, I wrote an article called Get Rich or Die Vlogging, which I didn't choose the title, but it's pretty good. And it was about how you can be a internet visible person, but have no money to show for it. And I talked to a lot of my friends who were YouTubers who had secret day jobs and worked at restaurants or Starbucks, or one girl actually had to quit Starbucks because her fans memorized her schedule and were showing up on her schedule. Or a friend of mine was working at a restaurant and then also worked at BuzzFeed with me, and BuzzFeed decided to host their Golden Globes party at the restaurant she worked at. So then she had to work our Golden Globes party with all her coworkers. Total nightmare. So things like that, and people were very surprised. And I realized that nobody was talking about money. And the reason I decided to write that article is because I would cry about money all the time. It was like the biggest stressor. I would just cry. I couldn't figure out how other people had money. I couldn't figure out what you did with it if you ever got money. Why was I constantly, I wouldn't think about it for like a month, and then immediately there'd be some emergency, and then I'd, drain the canoe with a thimble and then go, ooh, that was a close call. And then it would just happen again, over and over again for my entire life. And so kind of came to a head when I was working at BuzzFeed, and there was a friend of mine sitting next to me, and he had his computer open to his bank account. And I said, oh, I have that too, pointed to a number. And he was like, what do you mean you have that too? And I was like, I have that also. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, I have the same credit card debt. And he was like, oh, no, that's my savings account. And I was like, huh? And then Allison, who was mentioned earlier, she sat behind me, and she whirled around and went, you have what? And she was like my best friend at the time, and she had no idea. And I went, you guys have what? I gotta leave. I gotta quit. And so the two of them were kind of the first people to be like, that's bad. And so from there, I started the show. And the first season of the show was, I call it Finances and Feelings. It was very like having my friends on and being like, what is money? I think like episode 4, I go, what is a stock? I called my student loan provider on the air and was like, is it bad that I pay you late? And they were like, yes. And I was like, cool. Let me just get a paper and pen out, write that down. I called the bank on the air, found out about cash rewards that had been sitting there that I didn't know that I had for upwards of 5 years. They were like, hey, you gonna ever redeem those? And I was like, redeem what? And they were like, oh, you know how on the card it says cash rewards? And I was like, I just thought it was like a fun title for the credit card. So I learned a lot season 1. And then over the course of like seasons 2 and 3, the show became more political. And so now season 3, it's a really fun arc if you start listening, because it's just like this really nice girl who then goes full socialist by season 3. And like by the end of season 3, I'm just like, I think we have to burn the banks to the ground. What do you think, person I've unsuspectedly had on this podcast? So it's been a journey. So on January 1st, the Bad with Money book came out, and the book was more like financial memoir, but also, which is a genre now, but also like deeper dives into sort of the systemic stuff that I had been witnessing. So I made this PowerPoint. I gave this PowerPoint I went to Simon & Schuster, who published the book, and they were like, can you do a presentation for like the people at Simon & Schuster? And I was like, sure. So I made this PowerPoint. It's the best PowerPoint you'll ever see. Don't even worry about it. It's really good, guys. It's Soup's Profesh. And all the photos, I guess I could get sued probably, because I don't know who took them, and I don't own them. So I don't know anything, and I have a money podcast. So the point of it was, I just had no idea where to even start. And I thought a lot of the questions that I could even ask were stupid questions. And I think a lot of the fear or the reason that we don't learn anything or have financial literacy, one of the big things is because we don't want to ask the stupid question. I always felt like there was like a day in school that I just like missed or something, and then everyone learned how to fill out a check and like what taxes are, and then I got back and they were like, no one tell Gabby about this class we had yesterday. Because it seemed like everyone knew something that I didn't know. Spoiler alert, nobody knew it. And so I felt like it was too late to ask the question. Now, in terms of financial literacy, that's a picture of me. I felt like there's not really a lot of financial literacy in school, and I think my conspiracy theory brain says that it's because it benefits the people at the top that the class system remain the same. I think they don't want, there's almost no economic mobility in this country. I think there was like a statistic that was like 40% of Americans couldn't come up with $400 in case of an emergency. And so there's this thing of, it benefits them to keep people where they're at. So if we had, rigorous financial literacy in school, people might, God forbid, learn how to save. And so I was curious about the practicality, like why didn't we have a class senior year about like how to do your taxes or what taxes are? Why didn't we learn anything about retirement? And it really depends on like coming from, like what family of origin you come from. So one of the things I talk about in the beginning of the book is like your money script. And it's this thing that this financial psychologist, that's his real job, Dr. Brad Klontz, he talks about how you were raised gives you a money script, and it's what you think about money. Whether that's, you saw your parents spend all the time, so you thought, okay, it's okay to spend all the time, or you saw them save a lot, and you thought, well, I don't want to live so frugally and never experience anything cool. I'm going to do the opposite. Whatever it is, it's somehow it hit you in a way that it solidified your thinking about money. So one of the things that he says to do is to sit down and write down what you witnessed in your family, of like what you saw your parents do, what you saw your guardians do, what they told you about money, whether like, I went through a phase, and I talk about in the book, of like very sort of into the musical Rent, and I was like, money's evil, like fuck the system, I had never paid rent in my life. I was 17 years old, and I was like, yeah, we're not gonna pay rent. Probably just pay that guy's rent, I think, but so like this idea that like people that have money are evil, right? And that like gets ingrained in you. But you have to figure out like, okay, if that's what you think, is that serving you? Is that correct? My parents specifically were very feast or famine. They were very like, we're gonna spend so much money today. We're having a great time. We're going to, Dollywood and all these like, we're gonna do all these like fun things at Disneyland and whatever. And then the next day they'd be like, oh my God, we have no money. Like we've screwed up. And as a kid, I would be like, well, remember yesterday when we did all that stuff? And they would be like, stop being nosy. So I think like that sort of gave me like this hippy-dippy mentality that they had, which was like, can't take it with you, man. So may as well just throw it away. And then when I first started making money like 2 years ago, I had no idea what to do with it. And even though it was like so pervasive and something that's just all around us, I had no idea what to do with it. I mean, when I first got my first like actual check, you may as well have given that check to a raccoon. Like that's about as like I did the same thing a raccoon would do with it, I assume. So why was I so? I never looked at anything. I was talking to the group that I met with before this of students, and I was saying that someone had asked me like, well, the title "Bad with Money," like what makes you bad with money? And I was like, I think I'm going to get into all the systemic stuff. Don't worry, this will become a socialist rant post-haste. But the thing was that I just wasn't paying attention to it or looking at it at all. And that was what was bad. Like this thing that was all around us, that's like literally the reason that I was doing all the stuff that I was doing, well, partially. But like all of that stuff, I never bothered to look at my bank account. I never bothered to see what I was spending on. I never bothered to see what was coming in. I resented, so I was working as a freelance reporter, and I would like get an article, I would sell an article, and I'd be like, oh my God, Dad, I sold this article. And my dad, and it's gonna be about this, and it'll be on this page of the magazine. And my dad would go, that's so cool, what are they paying you? And I'd be like, how dare you ask about, I'm an artist. And so I never thought about it. And I viewed productivity as being like my whole self-worth. When I graduated from college, I became obsessed with, I'm gonna date myself, I became obsessed with what job would go on Facebook. Like when you could write what your job was on Facebook, like I was like obsessed. Like I was like, within a month of graduating, if I don't have a cool update that's like, Gaby works here now, Facebook friends, then I was like, I should just jump off a bridge. Like which is, do the color code quiz. I'm a red, it's a whole thing. But it's a personality quiz. You'll be shook. But yeah, so I was like, who am I without a job? Who am I without productivity? But none of it translated to making money. It was all about the optics of like, how many articles could I show people I was writing? And I didn't even care if I got paid. Which, you can have both, but also, like, I never thought of myself as, I was like, if I'm not, are you a good friend? Are you a good daughter? No, you're a piece of nothing if you're not working. And this is like now it's kind of, I see it in like the productivity culture of like, you have to keep working, the optics of working, versus thinking about like, is this thing that you're doing actually making you money or advancing your career in any way beyond being able to post about it, which I'm still guilty of. I love to post. I love to be like, look at this thing that I'm doing. If anyone wants to tag me right now, that'd be amazing. So one of the things that I did in the first season of the podcast is I went to a coffee shop, and this was like right in the beginning of the first episode, and I went to people and I said, can I ask you 2 questions, strangers? And they were like, yeah, sure. And I was like, okay, question 1, what's your favorite sex position? And every person was like so happy to tell me. Like I was, sincerely, the barista was like, doggy style. I was like, get out of here. Like I didn't even ask you. You're not part of this. But then the second question I said, okay, well, how much money's in your bank account? And every person was like, that's too personal. I can't talk about that. No, I don't want to. One of the funniest was someone was like, my partner would be really angry if I said. And I was like, they're not gonna be mad about that first part? Okay? And so there's a lot of shame and embarrassment, and again, conspiracy theory brain is like, the same way that we don't do financial literacy classes, I think, as a way to keep people in their place, I think the idea that talking about money is tacky or taboo is also a way to keep people in their place. Because if you're not sharing information with the people around you who most likely have your similar income or similar situation or similar lifestyle, how is anybody going to learn anything? You can't. And then Jeff Bezos pays $0 in taxes again. Anyway, that's true. Amazon paid $0 in taxes this year. I think about it every day. They paid 0 in federal taxes, guys. And they made like 11 billion. It's fine. I'd literally wake up at night thinking about it. Okay. So who does benefit from us being able to not for us being unable to talk to each other? The personal finance industry. Ooh. This cool guy. Ooh. Those are such big scissors for such small. I've done this PowerPoint a bunch of times, and I'm just now realizing those are like for cutting hedges. Okay. He's wearing Scripps green. I heard that's your thing. So basically now they're like, great. They don't know anything because they don't have financial literacy and they don't talk to each other. Perfect. Time to sell them stuff. So the goal is to make you feel like a dum-dum with big words and confident, shiny con men and women. So it's basically like, when I was starting out doing stuff, and I still get shied away in this regard, because it's like, there's so much jargon, there's so many words, and they honestly just mean, it's very, like, once you look up the definition of something, you're like, oh, that's what that was. But, the fact that I had to go, what is a stock? And then was expecting like a very long answer. And they were like, it's just shares in a company. Oh, okay. Like there's just things that I think are purposefully portrayed as like very fast-paced and scary, and if you turn on CNBC, it's like someone's yelling at you, and then Jim Cramer's wearing a sombrero and telling you you'll never buy a house, and you're like, why is this happening? And that's all on purpose, because there was a woman that I spoke to who's awesome. Her name's Sally Krawczyk, and she has a company called Elevest, which helps women with investing. And she was saying how she worked on Wall Street in the 80s, and one of the things was this is like a whole thing, but basically she said she was like one of the only women working on Wall Street in the 80s, and she would get back to her desk after lunch, and her coworkers would have Xeroxed their penises and put them on her desk. So that's just a fun 80s tidbit for you guys. And that was like fine, and everyone loved it. She didn't. But so she was saying that like a lot of this stuff is meant to keep, and the way that behavior was on Wall Street, like all of that stuff trickled down to keep it to be like this boys club for these like only cis, straight, white, able-bodied, neurotypical, white dudes that at the top, and then anyone else, it's like, let's scare them off. So that's what's doing here. That's what's going on here. Then you pay so that you can get rich and fuck everyone else. Because I was thinking a lot about this when I was writing the book, like, obviously, I give tips and tricks in the book, and I try to like tell you how to, here's how you can make your life better. But one thing that I really struggled with was the intersection of like personal and political with money, where it's like I can tell you these tips and tricks and how to like get yourself into a better situation, ideally so that you can then go out and vote and advocate politically for the people who for this advice really wouldn't help them. But because some stuff is just too stacked up against too systemic. One of the professors I spoke to, he said, you can do a lot of personal finance stuff, but any sort of big monumental change that'll really make everyone's life better has to come from like top down, which is what I found in my research too. But so it's hard for me to, like, I wanted the book, when I first turned in the book, they were like, cool, this is like a really cool book of socialist rants. You're gonna need to put some advice in here. And I was like, says you, but then I did. So I think it's tough because then the implication becomes, well, I'm gonna do better, and then I'll leave everyone else in the dust. And it can't really be that way. And that's, I think, the problem with personal finance, the industry in general, is that when they go to give you advice, their advice is do this so that you can screw over the guy next to you, versus like do this so that we can all try to get better and then maybe change the system that requires you to screw people over. Right. So this was some clip art that I found. Pretty good. And so it's confusing on purpose in a way that it does not need to be. And I think that there's a lot of intimidation in that, and just get rid of it. Because my friend Susie Orman, she called me, and it was the scariest thing that's ever happened. It's true. She saw me on CNBC, and she asked my publicist if she could call me. And then I spoke to her on the phone, and then she's a guest on season 4 of Bad with Money. But I asked her, like, do you feel like you're out of touch? And she was like, no. And she was like, no, I earned this island I live on. And I was like, you know what, girl, you're right. Like, what do you say to that? There's nothing to say. You're like, oh yeah, no, she does. She lives on an island that she owns. It's incredible. She sent me pictures of herself fishing. So anyway, she's the best. Yeah. So they sort of their angle is, if you don't have money, you are bad and dumb and also morally bankrupt. So it's this thing of like, not only are you, money is a personal, intellectual, and moral failing. There's no, like, I just did a Q&A, a live Q&A, and I was talking to, and someone said, and I was so furious, I posted it out on Twitter. Someone said, because that's what you do when you're furious. No, and someone said, oh, well, after I work a really good job, and I'm very frugal, and after all of that, every month I still only have like $200 to play with, like, or to put in savings or whatever. Like, how is this possible? And I was like, and I gave some advice of stuff to do. I even like Dave Ramsey, the guy with the hedge cutters. He always I don't like his whole thing, which is like, cut your cable, never eat any food, live on a hut, whatever. He's very into like minimalism. And I don't necessarily think that's for everyone, but I gave her that sort of advice. I even went Dave Ramsey at her. And then person underneath like commented and was like, oh, you saying that this could, like, because I was like, hey man, I'm so sorry, this is really a systemic issue, but here's some tips I can give you. And then this guy was like, oh, this saying that it's a systemic issue is the dumbest thing I've ever heard a personal finance guru say, because you should just be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you should just work harder. And like if she doesn't have any money at the end of the month, then she's probably not working hard enough and all this stuff. And I was just like, oh no, like, I wrote back, I was like, buddy, if you think that it's not harder to be like, to have any sort of extenuating circumstances, like whatever, let's say you're black, you're a woman, you're trans, but even if you're disabled, if you're a veteran, if you were previously homeless, like if you have a drug charge, like anything that it constitutes, I don't know, humanity, like then that is going to make every step of this harder. Like, how do you not, you're right, we should all just work more, probably. We should all just work harder. And so that's kind of the message that a lot of these personal finance people send, and then commenters internalize it. And so I think they want to think, well, if I'm a good person and I work harder, then surely everything will work out for me. And there's a thing called the prosperity gospel, which says, only good, smart people get rich. It's a thing that people believe, and it's this idea, it's why, aside from racism, it's why like poor white people were voting for Trump. It's that thing that people talk about where they're like, it's economic anxiety, right? It's like, oh, well, they think one day, because they're a good person, they will be rich like him, and then they don't want their 11 millionth dollar taxed. And that's, as we can see, patently untrue. And this is all just to add sadness to the whole thing. So money is a thing that is just gonna be there. It's just gonna happen. And the problem, Allison, my comedy partner, always says there's the problem and then there's how you feel about the problem. And if you can eliminate how you feel about the problem, you can better tackle the problem. So if you get rid of the like shame, sadness, embarrassment, which is very hard to do, but if you can do that, then you can actually begin to tackle the actual problem. I can do my taxes, I can cry for 2 hours beforehand, and then I can do my taxes, or I could just do my taxes and maybe cry for like 15 minutes beforehand. I actually just said, they like interviewed me for the New York Times, and one of the quotes that I gave was like, at least I've made crying while doing my taxes my brand. And they ran that in the Times. So the point is that statistically, you all in this room, because you're all college students and you all are like in the same demo, you have the best information because for each other. Like, if you have a trick or a tip, or if your friend is like, what accountant do you use? Like, or if your friend is like, hey, do you have a savings account? Is there a bank that you prefer? Whatever, like any kind of information that you have, if you share it with each other, it's over for these bitches. Like I was talking to the group before this, but I read a book called Your Money or Your Life by this woman, Vicki Robin, and she was talking about community as financial, like a way to save money, in the sense that like if you have friends and you talk to people and you can share with each other, like for my book tour, I went to my friend Brittany's house and I just wore all of her clothes for my book tour because I wanted new clothes. Or like if your friend cuts hair, or if whatever it is, like the more community you have, clothing swaps, anything, the more community you have, the less likely you are to spend money. Because if you need help with something, there's someone you can ask. Or so that chapter really blew my mind, because it was like, if you're not embarrassed, if we like eliminate the embarrassment and everyone talks to each other, who knows, man? I don't know if I have time for this, but I went to the Federal Reserve and it was fucked up, you guys. I'll say one thing about the Federal Reserve, because I was in Chicago and I had like some time off. I was there for work and I had some time off, and I thought, I'll go to the Federal Reserve alone, because they give tours. And so I went, and it was just me and this one other guy, and I was like, what's he doing here? And I think he was probably like, what's she doing here? But I took a tour of the Federal Reserve, and there was this one thing where they had this big box of cash, and then it was like a sign, and it said like, take a picture with this money. It's $1 million, probably more money than you'll ever see in your life. And I was like, what a rude sign. You don't know me. You do know me. There's a whole thing about the Federal Reserve, but I'll skip that. Okay. So a lot of these things, I'm sure like I'm a millennial, you guys are probably Gen Z, I'm sure you hear all the time like, oh, you're entitled. But like, there's no, like, my girlfriend. I don't know if you guys know her. We're dating. It's pretty serious. So anyway, I'm like thinking of moving to DC for her. So there's nothing radical about moral clarity. Like, don't let it get into your head that like asking these questions or questioning the financial systems is somehow like too radical. I always think about and I think this is true for a lot of people for your age, which I think you guys are a little bit ahead of millennials in that way, because we really internalize the entitled message, and I think you guys are a little bit over it. But it's like this thing where the activists at Parkland, the biggest complaints that were lobbed at them were like, oh, you guys just don't understand how the system works. You don't understand how the system works. And I remember them being like, no, we understand how it works. We're saying we don't like it. And I was like, yeah, exactly. It's all fucked up. And so I think like a lot of stuff is, I think a lot of the stuff that people our age are made fun of for doing, like, it is stuff that would actually like serve our best interests, so just ignore. Like there's a whole thing now for salary transparency, you know, like when you get to a job, sharing your salary, because it's been proven to actually like help people of color negotiate higher salaries when there's salary transparency. Or, you know, saying that we don't want to do unpaid internships because unpaid internships are actually unfair and they keep interns, you know, they basically hinder diversity at companies. And I'm talking about economic diversity as well, class system diversity as well. Or like, you know, but then there's the whole thing of like, well, you got to pay your dues, you got to do the unpaid internship. Oh, you got to, you know, and like, that's the thing, is like, we understand it, we just don't like it. So why aren't there riots in the streets? Oh wait, there were. And the media made fun of us and we stopped. This is just me having, wow, how timely. This is just me having issues with a lot of social justice movements not being intersectional. Also, this is also very timely. During 2016, and you guys can try this now in 2020 because it's fun. Whenever you hear a guy talking about Bernie Sanders, just insist that his name is Bernard Saunders. Just keep calling him Bernard Saunders and refer to him only as Bernard Saunders. And if some white guy tries to be like, I think it's Bernie Sanders, go, no, I don't think so. I did it all of 2016 and it's super fun. See how long before they go, are you joking? So now what do? Do you live in a hut? Do you avoid the system? It occurred to me way late that there should be a person in that hut to say me, because otherwise, who's me? I gotta swap that photo out. But basically, like, this is the problem, is like, if you're any kind of, you know, social justice oriented, marginalized person, like, how do you better things for yourself while also being like, but I hate this system. Like I have a friend, Taylor Hatmaker, she's a writer for TechCrunch, and she made a really cool document called Cryptocurrency for Queers. And she was passing it around amongst our friends, and it was basically like, she made like a 10-page Google Doc explaining to us, our queer friends, how could we get involved in cryptocurrency? And the idea, and like the whole beginning of it was just her being like, look, I think capitalism's bad, we can all agree. But I think I would rather have this new money thing be taken, I would rather, before it's only taken over by the subset of people who it's marketed towards, I would rather we get in here and like actually, you know, maybe get a foothold in this. And like there's really cool, I talked to on the podcast, they do, I think it's called Wakanda Coin. It's like Bitcoin for Black people. And like, just like trying to make these systems, how do you go in and like radicalize these systems that exist, but also be like, but they're bad? I don't know. I don't have an answer. It's really tough. And so I think it's gotta be a mix of both. Personal finance is not gonna fix your economic problems, but it can help you. But then there's also structural inequality, so it's a whole mess. I think it's a little bit of that thing of like, you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself before putting it on the child. Mostly because I guess the child has small hands. Why do they make you do that? Anyway, the point is, it's a little bit of like, look into your own finances, look into what your incorrect or beliefs that don't serve you about money are. Figure out, I was saying to the people in the earlier thing, you know, when I was in high school and college was when I had the least expenses of my life. Paid no rent in high school. I was like trying to think of like, in the book, I'm like trying to think of what my expenses were in high school and college. Other than, you know, obviously like you're paying tuition and stuff, but like on a day-to-day, what are my expenses? And I was like, high school, I think it was mostly like black eyeliner and chokers. And then like college, it was like, I think beer. And then that was it. So that would have been the time when you could save the most money of your life. You're on your parents' health insurance, I assume. Like, you know, there's like things that are going your way now. But I just never, I couldn't tell you where, I don't know where any of that money went. And so I think like if someone was like, oh, if you could go back in time and tell your younger self. And so I'm like, well, I think I would just say be aware, figure out like, is there a way to put some money away? I told them this too, is that like you can always start over. Like I had a savings account. I had like, when I first started making money, so like 2 years ago, I was like, yeah, I got this little savings account. This is so amazing. I did it. I'm crushing it. And then my car broke down. I had to fix my car. And so I drained the savings account to fix my car. And then I went to my therapist and I was hysterically crying. They don't pay her enough. And she was like, because I was just like, I had to use my savings and I'm a garbage person. See the Susie Orman slide back in the back. And then she was like, well, why do you think you had that savings? And I was like, to have it? And she was like, no, like you had it so that in case something happened, now you didn't take out a loan, you didn't put it on a credit card. Like you had it to cushion yourself. Like now you just start over. And I was like, oh, you just start over. So if you're like in college and you're like, well, but I don't know, like what if I start now, like what if I have to empty it? Okay, what if you do? You can always start over, except if we all die. This used to be the last slide, and the people at Simon & Schuster gave me some feedback about how I should probably have a slide after this one, so it gets more upbeat. I was like, oh no, I can't end on the mushroom cloud. So the point is, don't add shame to something that's already shameful. You're normal. No one knows anything. If you start talking to each other about it, and being honest with each other and saying things like, I had a friend a few years ago, it was the first friend who ever was like, oh, I don't think I can go out tonight. And I was like, I said, I'm going to say it again, even though I said I shouldn't say it, but I was like, oh my God, this is the bravest person I've ever met. Like, the Peace Corps, like this person's incredible. And it was like, because I was like, I can't believe that she just said that. That's like, wow. But then now it's just over the last like few years since she did that, it's just changed. Like I'll suggest different things, or I'll like, it just was like such honesty that I felt like, let me be honest with her too. And I think that more people in this room are probably want to think along those lines, or want to ask each other for help, or want to like, get into it with each other about like, what actually are you doing? Like I know you work at a restaurant, like what do you do with your tip money? All that stuff. And they feel like they can't ask, but like if everyone's thinking about it, it's almost like when I was closeted in high school. I'm just thinking about this now. When I was like closeted in high school, and I had a friend that I met later who also went to high school with me, but she was closeted at the time too. And I always said like, oh, I wish we had like a beacon that only we could see, and we would have like known. So I think everybody's probably facing, just talk to each other. This is where it gets happier. I put a B. Oh, that's such low image quality. Oh, it looks like shit up there. Well, it looked okay in the thing. Anyway, okay, here are some things you can do. Open your mail. We're going to wrap it up real quick. Open your mail. I never opened my mail. I threw it away because I didn't need that negativity in my life. Open it. Stuff's in there. Look at your interest rates. Interest rates, I think about almost as much as I think about how Amazon didn't pay any federal taxes. I think about interest rates because I had student loans and I was paying them all evenly, and then it turned out that 3 of them, the interest rate was 5%, which is very normal, and then 1 of them, the interest rate was 15%. And when I looked at that for the first time and realized that, I knew to focus on that one and pay that one off first. and look at your credit card interest rates. I had credit card for 5 years. The first year and a half was like 0 interest. You're not going to pay any interest on this, baby. And then after that, it went up to 22% interest. But I never checked back to make sure. Like, oh, is that still good? Oh no, it's bad now. Great. Also, look into retirement, and that doesn't mean you have to like start, but just like look at it. See what the types are. Look at the IRAs. See if you have a job. See if your HR department, go to them. Ask if they match the 401k. Sometimes companies, whatever you put in your 401k, sometimes a company will match it. You can also ask if you have a job, like a 9-to-5 job, you can ask HR. They're just sitting there. You can ask them questions. I didn't ask. I would just like give them the paperwork and hope and just go, please never speak to me. Go there and ask them shit. That's their job. Also vote and read the news. And if you put the oxygen mask on yourself and you take care of yourself, great, but that doesn't excuse you from being politically engaged and making sure, because there are a lot of people, for instance, disabled people cannot save more than $2,000 total before their benefits are cut. That's right. That's a cycle. So a lot of things that law was made in like the 80s. So a lot of things are still outdated and they don't serve the people, that they were made for at the time. And you just have to be aware that there's a lot of people for which the system actively works against them. So be up to date on that. And I ended on this. I thought this color was soothing. I thought this photo was soothing. So that's the end of the PowerPoint. And then we're going to do a Q&A. So thank you. This is better than just the mushroom cloud, right? Like, if you ended on that, probably bad, right? But this is like, wow, right? I made a good, yeah, great.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm Chugo. I'm a Scripps sophomore.
Hey.
I just wanted to ask, when do you know to treat yourself? Because I'm broke all the time.
Yeah.
So.
No, I feel you. Yeah, it's interesting because I had, a guy that I dated when I was starting the podcast, he came from a wealthy family. He had no student loans. So there was and I was always broke. And there was a thing that happened where he was like, well, if I was broke like you, all I would think about is how to get more money. And I was like, okay. And I was like, but also, you have to live your life. I can't, it becomes so normalized, I think. And I was trying to think about why I was that way. And I was like, I think it was so normal that I never thought of it. I mean, I thought of it as being broke, but I never really thought of it as being broke because I was like, this is what life is. So I kind of was like, well, what am I supposed to wake up and not have breakfast and not brush my teeth and just immediately start making money? And because that's just not how you think if it's become so normalized. I don't know if that makes sense, but so I think you have to be. I think going through your bank statements is really helpful with a highlighter, because it helps you see what you tend to treat yourself on and what actually matters to you. So I don't love the sweeping sort of latte factor advice of well, don't get a coffee or don't do, because that's not what everyone's life is. But there's certain things that my girlfriend lives with 2 guys in a bachelor pad because she doesn't care about where she lives and she doesn't care if it's disgusting, but she every 3 months she wants something from Gucci, or every 6 months or whatever. So it's figuring out what treating yourself looks like to you, and what doesn't matter to you and what does matter to you. I wanted to get a dog, but I waited a really long time because I was like, okay, I need to figure out what is going to go in place of getting this dog. And I think it's just about going through and really on paper figuring out what matters to you. She and I both use You Need a Budget. And I have a line item on there for just to, if I have the extra money, where does it go? And I have a line item on there for massages. and she doesn't because she's like, don't touch me. But I'm like, okay, well, if there's extra money at the end of the month, what do I care about? And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to put this little line item for massages because I went through my bank statement and I was like, I would like to be able to do this once every few months or whatever. So it really just is like sitting down with yourself and thinking like, what is self-care, and then what is putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. Like, there's also the element of mental health where I talked to a girl for the book and in the podcast named Sarah Schaefer, who says that she was like, she buys things to instantly feel better. So like, you know, because her mom, when she was a kid, when she would be really sad, her mom would buy her a gift from the drugstore. And so she associated like sadness with gift. And so that she had to detangle, because it's stuff that she doesn't actually care about or want. It would just be like a shirt that she's like, the next day is like, I don't even want this. So it's like you have to also detangle like what's treating yourself and what's just like treating mental illness with like a bandeau top from Forever 21 or whatever, you know, that's basically made of strings. So yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Hi, I'm Annie. I'm a Scripps first year.
Hey.
Hello. So I was noticing you were talking a little bit about like money with disability. I am physically disabled. I'm chronically ill, and essentially, I'm only gonna get worse from here. You know what I mean? Like,
hey, congrats.
Thank you. This is the healthiest I'll ever be, and I'm using a walker at 18. You know, it's just like it's fine and it's good, and I'm happy. Like, it's fine. But you know, how do you necessarily recommend like saving while needing to pay for healthcare to not be dead?
Right.
Because I'll be super dead.
Yeah. I mean, the whole way that disability is set up, and especially healthcare is set up, is broken. I mean, it's just fully broken. And I've had other people that I've like done these talks or whatever, and I've had people say, well, you know, okay, if I need this walker and it's this month and this kind of thing. And a lot of times I just go, that fucking sucks, dude. Like, that sucks. There's a lot of stuff wherein healthcare isn't considered part of. I'm always curious because healthcare should be more of a millennial Gen Z issue, because I feel like we're the people that are getting the most GoFundMes. Like, how many, you know, we see GoFundMes for people our age all the time. You get them in on Twitter or in your email or whatever, and like it's just constant. And we always say like, oh, well, student loans are the big issue of these generations. But like, I think probably healthcare is going to end up being one of the even bigger ones, because it's going to, you know, it runs out. You guys turn 26, you get off if you're on your parents' healthcare, you get off your parents' healthcare, and then the costs are only going to rise from now until then. So it's like, I think it's one of those things where it has to be like voted top down, like big changes. I mean, on a personal level, like I was saying this to the other group. There was a girl who said, was like asking me, and she was like, if I have a little bit of extra money, do I put it in a savings account or do I start therapy? And I was like, oh. And I was like, I think you should start therapy, because I think you can't, like, it's tough to tell people to save when they're like aren't be able to like take care of themselves medically. But I'm sure someone else would, like a different financial person would be like, well, no, like saving's the most important. But I just can't imagine, like, I can't imagine that if you're not taken care of, like, you know, medically, that you're gonna be in a place to be like, and here's, like, you know, you'll stare at that savings money and go, well, could have gone to the doctor or something. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it has to become like part of the line item. Like, it has to become part of the budget. Like, and it sucks, and it's like unfair. And then we live in a first world country where that should be taken care of. But different people, you know, it is this thing where a lot of financial advice is like, well, just do this, just do that. By 30, you should have saved this. And that was one of the disability community really came for this one woman who gave this advice on Twitter where she was like, by 30, you should have saved X or whatever. And it was like, I was watching her get eaten alive, because I love to do that. And And I was like looking at the comments, and all the comments were from disability activists being like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, we legally cannot save. Like, we're, you know, this, and then like she kind of, I think a lot of times they don't take into account like real life and reality. So hopefully, like, it was good to see that people were getting louder about it at someone who has, you know, an audience. But I think it's like one of those things that's just like shitty, and you're gonna have to take that into account for you, and then some stupid financial guru will be like, well, why don't you have a retirement? And then you'll just punch them in the face. Or hit them with your walker, I guess. Yeah, look, we live in a dystopia. It's the Hunger Games out here. Yeah, no, I know. Hey, I saw you earlier. Oh. Kiki, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, thanks. Once again, sorry for the...
No,
I thought it was like a handshake, and then I just high-fived you.
We
'cause I
high-fived,
panicked.
yeah.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah, it was like a hug, high five.
It
No,
was
now we're doing a handshake. Now we're doing a high five.
Personal interaction is so hard.
Yeah, we crushed it.
Yeah, it was great. 10 out of 10. Would high-five again. So just a question for someone who's really new and starting out. Do you have any recommendations of materials or books or apps or obviously podcasts that you would recommend for us to look into?
Yeah, my podcast, but then there's a podcast called Queer Money that's really good. It's these two guys who used to be financial advisors, and they're like a married couple, I think, and they talk about money for like the LGBTQ community, and I really like them. This book that I just read, Vicki Robbins' book, Your Money or Your Life, was like shaking me to my core. There's a Broke Millennial. I don't know if you know Broke Millennial, but I'm actually pretty excited because she has a book coming out, I think in April. She did like the Broke Millennial book, which was just a sort of finance book, and then she's now taking on like specific topics. So she has a book coming out in April that's like Broke Millennial on investing. And I like met up with her, and I was like, and she's like, yeah, I'm writing about investing. And I was like, yeah, tight, yeah, I know all about that. So when does that book come out? And can I read it now? Because I'm concerned that I might not ever learn about taxes unless I sell a book about taxes. Otherwise, I have no motivation. So I think that's what she did with investing. So I am curious to read something about investing that is like top down, you know, like from the bottom up. And then there's like, I follow, there's like a Fiscal Femme, which is a girl on Instagram, and then Ellevest, which is like the women's investing company. It's ELLEVEST. I liked a lot this book, Impact Investing by Morgan Simon, which actually might be good for you guys because the book is about how you should know where your investments are going into, which seems obvious, but we were talking about how again, like the teachers at Parkland didn't realize that their pensions were invested in the NRA until after the shooting, and so just like because they never looked into like where their pensions were being invested, which is like so rattling. And so this book is about like making sure that like how to invest in an ethical way, which I really liked, and also I don't have time to get into it, but basically you guys are you have power as college students over the endowment at your school. So if you look into where your school's endowment is invested and you think it's not, you don't like one of the companies, or you think it's not ethical, you can go get friends together and like go and talk to the school and be like, hey, we don't want you to be invested in this company that, I don't know, throws oil on dolphins. Like, can you not do that? And they have to listen to you. And there's stuff about how to do that in Morgan's book, which is like, because she was like, you're never gonna have that much money on your own, but like you can control where your college puts money, which was really fascinating. And her episode of the podcast talks about it too. And she's like, that's technically when you have the most money, is when you're in college, because you're in charge of, you can like sway the endowment. And I was like, oh, that's why they don't want you to know. Because then they're just gonna have people lined up outside being like, why are we investing in oil dolphins? And they're gonna be like, oh. But yeah, I have to think of some other ones. But those are like, there's a podcast called Paychecks and Balances that I was just on, these two guys. one guy is an auditor for the IRS, so I was so scared to talk to him because I didn't want him to know my name or what I looked like. It was terrifying. I think that's, yeah. But most recently, the Vicki Robin book like blew my mind.
Okay, we have time for one more.
Hi, my name is Selena. I'm a Pomona first year.
Hey.
I'm just curious, like, what kind of advice do you have for students who feel like they have the moral responsibility to help their families who have financial struggles, so it feels like you can't personally advance or like, progress because you want to help them?
Yeah, I talk about that in the book, that I had that as well. And it was interesting because I was making the same, like I had a comedy partner who comes from a wealthy family, and so it was interesting too, as we were like coming up together, I was watching, like we got paid the same thing, but she would keep the money and I would somehow not, for basically those reasons. So there's a lot of stuff in the book about, it's hard because like some of it is like creating boundaries where like you're like, look, I have to help myself. Like I have to be able to make sure that I can have a future. But then my mom always says fucked up shit to me, like, you're my retirement fund. And you're like, I wish you wouldn't say that. I'm sweating. So it is, and it is like a different, I don't know if it's just, like some family structures are just that way where it's like, I don't know if it's also because like we're like a Jewish family and so it's just like this thing of like all of our stuff is everybody's. But I was 25 when I finally got my own bank account. Like because my parents and I had a joint account and I would just put money in and they would take money out and it was like everybody's money. And it wasn't until I was like 25 and a friend of mine was like, that's insane. And then when I did it, they were furious. So mad. And you are, as a kid, you're like, I don't want my parents to be mad at me. But it was just so entangled. And I'm like in therapy, just being like, what are boundaries? Help me. I think you have to ask them, like, how can I need to be able to make sure that I can like have my own family. Like, but it is this tough thing where I think a lot of people our age have, there's these girls that I talk to who have decided, they're like, we're not having kids, and they had just their friends, and they were like, we decided neither of us are going to have kids because we have to take care of our parents and then ourselves, and then we have to save for our future. So in what world does a kid fall into that? And that's like kind of a common thing for people our age, especially because I think our parents, depending on their ages, either like got screwed over by the recession, or they lost their retirement funds in investments during like 2008 or whatever it was. And so yeah, I think it's just like facilitating an open conversation. Although I want to say, oh, that'll fix everything. My parents were so mad, like really mad, like for a while. So it's not a perfect thing, but I just couldn't keep living in the situation of like, yeah, what's mine is yours, definitely. Like, we have a joint account, take all the money out that you want, man. Like, because it was, I was like, how long can that go on? And 25 was too old. So, I just prepare for them to be mad, But you also can say, like, how do I have people my age aren't having kids. Like, how do I have a future if I'm giving everything, like, to the back end? And then they'll just be mad at you. Which my parents are all the time. I can't end on that. Guys, did you know Amazon paid 0 in federal taxes this year? It's a full nightmare.
No, I think we're all a little bit better with money right now.
Oh,
Thanks
good.
to Gaby Dunn. Let's give her a hand.